Hi, I'm Benjamin Payne. At the K-12 Education Office at Hillsdale College, we support school founding groups and their efforts to start classical schools across the country. Finding the right leader is one of the first and most important steps to building a successful school. While we do consider experience in education, we seek candidates who exhibit unwavering personal integrity, honesty, courage, and servant-hearted leadership. Perhaps that's you. If you're looking to engage in fulfilling, impactful, and challenging work protecting our nation's future and building up the next generation of virtuous citizens, we'd love to hear from you. I'm looking for strong school leaders right now. Learn more about how you can make a difference at hillsdale.edu/leader. hillsdale.edu/LEADER. That's hillsdale.edu/leader.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Rachel Holland. She is music teacher and department head at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana. Rachel, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Talking today of an overview of music at a Hillsdale K-12 school. Before we dig into the topic, tell us just a little bit about yourself, how you ended up at Seven Oaks, and about the school itself.
Sure. So I am trained actually as a musical theater actor. So after college, I spent about 5 years in Chicago as a working actor. I did primarily musicals, and I taught after-school programs, musical theater after-school programs. And I was actually introduced to the Barney Charter School Initiative, which is what it was called at the time, through my sister, who is the head of the teacher support team. At the time, it was much smaller. She was one of maybe 3 people in the office.
It's grown a little bit.
Yeah, and I was, for a variety of reasons, looking for something new. I was in my mid-20s. It was time to be done doing the actor thing, even though I was doing it fairly successfully. And so I did a lot of interviews at a lot of different schools. I ultimately ended up at Seven Oaks because I was drawn to our headmaster, Dr. Ship, who is still at the school, and the particular community that we serve. It's rural Indiana, which is a community I'm familiar with. I'm from northern Indiana. Seven Oaks and we're now entering our 9th year. So I was the founding music teacher, and my role has expanded outside of music as well. But, my first love is teaching music. Most recently, I taught kindergarten, 3rd grade, 5th grade, and 8th grade music, and I direct the musicals and the plays at Seven Oaks.
What'd you do last year?
We did Macbeth in the fall and Oklahoma in the spring.
And you liked them both? Went well?
Yes, yeah, very, very much so. I'm a big musical theater fan, but the Shakespeare's have also been really fun.
Great.
Yeah.
So let's give people an overview. If you look at what makes music in a Hillsdale K-12 school different from other schools, what are those differentiating factors people might notice?
So I would say that one of the big things is that our curriculum is really content rich. So if you look at the program guide, what you'll see is that every year from kindergarten through 8th grade has elements of music or music theory requirements, music appreciation, composers, pieces of music, understanding of instruments in the orchestra, and songs, a list of songs that every student in kindergarten through 8th grade should know and should have produced in some way. At Seven Oaks, we do this through singing. So it's a very content-rich curriculum. And then, as is true of all classical classrooms, and music is included in this, there should be a sense of order and teacher-led learning in the classroom. Though we do have fun, we don't believe that music class should just be silly fun time in which the children are simply expressing themselves while their teacher gets a break and they're not sitting in their desk. We believe that it should be run like any other class, even though it is a little bit more active, I would say, than your average math class. And then I require of my teachers, both in music and art and PE, a class period that involves all of the elements. So we're never going to have a class that's just theory or just appreciation, that there's a segment of all of those things in each class period so that the students are getting a well-rounded experience of music in every half hour to 45-minute class period that they have.
So let's break that down a little bit. Why is it so important to get all three of those things in a single class period? Theory, appreciation, performance. Why do you need all three in each class period?
Well, there's a few reasons for that. First, simply because if you're teaching, especially kindergarten through fifth grade, you cannot sustain meaningful attention for a half-hour class period doing one activity. Second, you don't see them every single day. We get to see our students every other day, except in kindergarten first, we do every third day. But some teachers have them once a week. Some teachers have them twice a week. So if you leave a particular skill behind for months and months and months, the expectation that they're going to be able to retain those skills, that's just a silly expectation. They won't. And I think it then reminds the students either consciously when they're in middle school or subconsciously when they're younger that music is all of these things. It's understanding the ins and outs of how it works. It's appreciating the beauty and knowing things about it and producing. One of the reasons I emphasize this is that depending on who you are and your personality and your background as a teacher, you will have the tendency to go toward one of those things or the other. For me, it was definitely, obviously, performance because I am primarily a performer. And I had to force myself to remember that this is not just singing class. It can't be first because you're going to run out of things to do.
Sure.
And that's not the entirety of what we're trying to teach them to do. It can be that tendency because it's also, for me, the most fun. But when you have your really highly educated teachers with PhDs and things like that, there can be a tendency to go toward lecture the entire time and talk about and expect students to be just as on board as you are for the beauty of this particular piece just because. Well, we have to teach them that. But that's a whole other podcast interview.
With the focus on history and theory, does that mean class is serious and boring at times for the students?
It does not have to be. Again, if you segment your class period correctly and challenge yourself to ask questions in such that you hear from every student every class period where that's possible. And especially in our grammar school classes, I try to make sure that there's some element of movement in every 30-minute class period, whether it's dancing to music or playing a game that gets them up and down, that's showing me that they understand what kind of instrument fits in what family. Of course, doing motions and while they're singing. These kinds of things keep class fun but not fun for the sake of fun, fun for the sake of appreciation of the material and retention of the material.
Talking with Rachel Holland. She is music teacher and department head at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana. I want to come back and ask about those questions in a minute, but we step back for just a moment. The idea of teaching music in K-8, K-12, why is it an important part of the curriculum? Why not use that time for more math, more science? And if we're going to do it, what is an appropriate amount of time to make it worthwhile?
So the second part of that question is tricky, but the first part I think is a more of an easy answer. We talk a lot about the true, the good, and the beautiful. And as music and art teachers, especially, we consider ourselves sort of the torchbearers for the beautiful. You feed your mind, you feed your body every day. It's our job to feed your soul. And the image I like to say is, if we're going to feed your soul, we're not going to feed it cake. Because you might enjoy the cake of the soul, but it's not going to nourish you. But we're also not going to feed your soul strictly broccoli, right? Because at a certain point, you're going to be like, no, thank you. I don't want any more broccoli. So I like to say that in our music classes, we're feeding you the chicken pot pie of the soul. It's multifaceted. It has lots of flavors. But it's also nourishing. And I think if you don't have music and you don't have art, you've lost some of that ability to connect to the soul of your learning. I also personally believe that, particularly with singing is a part of our collective culture, and everyone should be allowed to participate in it regardless of their level of talent. I think as a culture, we've become what I call slaves to the cult of talent, which leaves people feeling cut off from the opportunity to participate in what is our collective culture. So at Seven Oaks, we require every student in kindergarten through 8th grade to sing, and to sing joyfully, or as I tell some of my 7th, 8th grade boys, you have to at least pretend to enjoy it. And then they ultimately do. But the ability to do it well should not be cutting people off from the roots of our culture. And then the other question you said is how much time? This is controversial because it really depends on the school leader and what other things they've decided to prioritize at school, and also state requirements.
Sure.
There are state laws in different places, but so we have half an hour every 3rd day in kindergarten and 1st grade, every other day in 2nd grade through 5th grade, and then 45 minutes every other day in 6th through 8th grade. And I have found that to be exactly the right amount of time. I think you can go a little, like if you did 2 days a week, I think you would be okay. I do not think that it is particularly fruitful to have a class that only happens once a week regularly. It puts your teacher in a position to not be able to fulfill the curriculum that they've been given. It also doesn't give them an opportunity to really know their students on a level that makes the student want to engage, especially your older students. A lot of what gets those older kids in is them engaging with you as a person. And if they see you once a week, it also tells them, well, this person is not nearly as important as my Latin teacher, because I see my Latin teacher every day and I only see this lady once a week. Yeah. So I do think it is important, if you're going to fulfill all of the facets of the music and art curriculum, that your teachers be given a sufficient amount of time to do their jobs properly.
Let's talk about some of that in-classroom time. You said earlier that part of what makes it not serious, not boring, part of what gets students interactive is asking good questions. How do you present these questions about music, be it about history, theory, performance, in a way that makes students think and elicits good responses? Yeah,
so what I require of the teachers in my department at Seven Oaks is to have it be the goal. It's not always possible to hear from every student in every class period. And that means that not every question you're going to ask is going to be this like deeply thought-provoking question. But if you allow students to disengage, then they've lost the opportunity to learn anything. So even just asking lower level questions gets everybody involved. So if you think about questions, asking questions in the same way that you think about the organization of education, you have your grammar level questions, your logic, and your rhetoric level questions. So the way that I give it to my teachers is your grammar level questions are your easy questions. In younger grades, you can use choral response. It's your review. It's your who, what, where. What's the title of this piece? Who composed it? Where are they from? Those kinds of basic review questions that keep those details in the students' brains. These kinds of questions are really great for the top of class. It's an opportunity for your lower students who maybe cannot engage more deeply yet to still be an active participant in class and feel like they've accomplished something. So then you've got them right at the beginning of class and you've got them for the rest of the time. Your next level questions, I like to give examples to teachers of things like, how does this work? Compare this piece of music to this piece of art. That's one that I ask a lot in middle school. So examples I give is, how is this piece of music similar to this piece of art when you're introducing something like Impressionism? Kids are familiar with Impressionist art already. How is the music reflecting this piece of art? Why does this piece of music fit into this period? So you're identifying different traits that you're hearing in the music. How does this instrument make sound with the younger kids? It's, okay, so what do I do to make this happen? Well, you hit it. Okay, so then what's happening when I hit it? And guiding them through that. And then, of course, you have your higher level questions. With the younger kids, I like to use imagine questions, like put yourself into the position of this composer. Why? if we do this, then what? So one of the favorite questions I have in kindergarten when I introduce the drum is I get out my djembe, I play, it's really loud, it has a really deep vibration. And then I ask them, okay, what will happen if I put this drum on the floor? How do you think the sound will change? And make their hypothesis in their own head. And then I play it on the floor and like, oh, that was so cool. And then the question is, okay, why? Why did it sound different? And it gets us understanding how, at least on a kindergarten level, how resonance works, how vibrations create sound, what happens when you can't, like, why is the drum hollow?
Yeah.
That gets their brain more engaged than if I were to just say, this drum is hollow, and that's why it vibrates when you make sound. And the kids really always love that. I also always like to use the phrase, jump into the shoes of the character telling this story. Because much of what we listen to, especially in the grammar school, is storytelling through music. Because, again, you'll hear this in other podcasts, it's one of the most effective ways of teaching, especially younger students, but it's true of older students too, it's through stories. And we can tell stories effectively in music just as well as they can through books. Just
as in any other subject, I'm sure there are students who this is their jam. This is what they want to do. They love music. They've been exposed to music perhaps for years before they're even in the classroom. And for others, it's new. And for others, it's not what they particularly want to be concentrating on. So when you are asking questions and engaging students, how do you do so in a way that challenges those students who have had some experience, who are very interested in what you're doing, while also engaging those who need that introductory step into the world of music?
Yeah, so I would say that's one of our biggest challenges as co-curricular teachers is that we have less time with the students and not a lot of time to differentiate between ability levels in the classroom. So making sure that you have as many of those levels of questions as possible to engage everybody. But I think it's also about the environment that you set in your classroom. This is true for answering questions. It's also true for singing. Creating a space, I hate to use the word safe space, but in a space where it feels safe for all of the students to be able to sing. Setting the expectation. I consider it a discipline issue if a student is, even with their eyes, rude about how somebody else is singing. I make it very clear from day one of 8th grade that you can go visit the assistant headmaster's office if you feel like expressing an opinion on someone else's singing. Otherwise, I'm the only one who's allowed to have an opinion. But also doing things like embracing voice cracks as normal and okay. I crack all the time if I have 8 a.m. 8th grade music, and I am clearly a low alto. So if I'm going to, sing in an E flat at 8 o'clock in the morning, it's just not going to happen. But if I crack, it's okay if you crack too. Being silly, I do silly warm-ups with my older kids, make crazy sounds, do crazy things with their bodies, because then we're all doing idiotic looking things. And so it's okay for you to do them. A big thing for me is emphasizing the ensemble and de-emphasizing the individual. So there is a temptation to find your most talented student and highlight them. I think in the general music classroom is not the place for that. If I want to highlight a very talented 8th grader, I will give them a lead role in the musical. But that's a completely separate world from what we're doing in music class, which is an ensemble activity together in which I do not care who's the worst. I also don't care who's the best. We're creating something together. And then for us, a big thing has been consistency. If you sing from kindergarten through 8th grade and everybody is expected to do it every time they come into music class, then at a certain point, it becomes a habit, whether it's your thing or not. So we've gotten to a place now after we're entering our 9th year where we just simply, especially in our older grades, we don't face resistance from the students anymore. And the young men come into music class and they know that they're expected to sing, and they know that I don't care how good they are at it. There's also an element that I expect a certain level of work, and because of my kind of persona, they think I'm going to tell them that they've done a terrible job. I'm only going to tell them that they've done a terrible job if they're not doing the work and putting in the effort that I've asked for. There is an element when you are asking every single person to sing that that some people are not going to be able to match the pitch. Or some 6th, 7th grade boys have not figured out how their voice has changed yet. And so they're going to drone down on a low note the entire time. But I would say that excellence and beauty are two different things. And there is something deeply beautiful about a concert in which you can hear loudly an 8th grade boy singing off pitch.
Yeah.
Because he's participating in our collective culture.
So this vocal-based program at Seven Oaks, is it possible to create an environment in which it's not just incumbent upon you to do the work, but you're in a situation where the students are encouraging each other to sing and to do their best? How much do they have to push each other in these activities?
That's a really good question. I think there's a lot of different answers to that. You know, everyone should be having a final performance of some kind. So as a theater actor, we're really big on the ensemble and the collaborative nature of things. So if I'm constantly reminding them, like, listen, when you're in the concert, I'm not singing with you. What you have is each other. Mm-hmm. So you decide how much support and positivity you're going to give to one another. Sometimes I don't love competition, but I will have a friendly sort of like, well, the girls are giving me a lot of sound on their part. Actually, this past year it was more, I can hear the guys over everybody. So ladies, like, what are you going to do about this? But primarily, again, I think it's about this spirit of collaboration. And if a middle schooler thinks that you've created some sort of status environment in the classroom, their whole life and social life is based on status that they hate. So if you as the teacher are feeding into that, then you're making an environment that they don't want to be a part of. And so if it's about everybody together, then they want to create that together.
Rachel Holland is music teacher and department head at Seven Oaks Classical School in Ellettsville, Indiana, as we discuss the overview of music at a Hillsdale K-12 school. Rachel, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Thank you.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K12. Hillsdale_K12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.